very warm good evening to all of you. We are not Instagram influencers or writers in that sense of the term. Here are two Booker winners, two wonderful books, Time Shelter and Kairos. Yes, that is Calicut and that is KLF, because books and good writing also, I think, create the kind of applause that we get here, and that is only typical of Kerala. Thank you so much. On that note, I welcome all my co-panelists, Jenny Erpenbeck, Georgi Gospodinov, and Max Czollek. I would like to begin by asking a very simple question. I think there's an idea of USSR that we all carry. Each one of us has a different USSR in our minds. And this is a place in Calicut, in Kerala, where this idea has exerted a lot of influence, whether it be on the political front, some very intense passions and, some very intense kinds of emotions in people. And USSR lives on as a metaphor, as a political metaphor, but also sometimes as a personal metaphor. So these are writers who have explored some of these angles, maybe from different perspectives. And I would like to begin by requesting them to talk about their work. Need not necessarily be about USSR, but there is an imaginary around the USSR that you could probably talk about and how it intersects with your work. Jenny, would you like to begin?
Good evening. Welcome to Kerala and Calicut, not in USSR now. But I think that at least for both of us, and for Time Shelter especially, the past is very important, the culture of the memory is very important, and the idea that you could bring past back to the present could be really seductive, but also very dangerous. And this is the main idea of the novel. Shortly, it's about a man who starts to build clinics for the past because of the people suffering from Alzheimer and dementia. And because when you're losing your memory, you're going back in your past. And the idea is to have the balance between your inner time and between the external time of these clinics. So it's a book about how we're choosing the past when we have a problem with the future, when we have a deficit of the future. And I think that now it's a such moment of the huge deficit of the future. And we're looking for the caves, we're looking for the shelters in the past. But for me, it's very important because I'm coming from Bulgaria. I used to live 20 years in the socialist country. And I know clearly one thing. When I was young, they promised us a bright future. It was typical for our ideology. Now, the populists promised us a bright past. They say, let's make America great again, the world great again, maybe India great again, Bulgaria great again. And I know with my skin that these are empty checks. The check of the past and the check of the future. So don't believe the people who promised you bright future or bright past. This is shortly what I could say for the beginning.
Hello. Yeah, my connection to Soviet Union is a perhaps special one. So my father was born in the Soviet Union in 1942 because his parents had emigrated to the Soviet Union during fascist fascist times in Germany. And during my whole childhood and youth, there was never much of a talk about how that time was for my grandparents in the Soviet Union. And I remember my grandmother saying one day that perhaps later, when you are really grown up, you will be interested in what we did and how we lived and what our visions were. And then, like when I was in my 30s, I started doing some research for one of my books about Stalinism and in that time. And I found out, I read a book that my grandmother had written about the Stalinist persecutions. She wrote about the irritation about friends being taken somewhere, disappearing. She couldn't believe that it was Stalin's fault, but she also had no explanation for that. So it was a time also of fear, of great hope, and then of fear. She was saved by Soviet Union, but she was also in danger because of being there. So all that I only learned about when I was grown up already, and my grandmother wasn't there anymore, so she was already gone. But the research about this time stayed with me. Also in Kairos, there's a Moscow chapter in which I speak about the dark sides of the system. And until now, I'm still in discussions with my father, who sometimes it happens to him that he still says Putin and the Soviet Union. And then I remember him that Putin doesn't mean the Soviet Union, although there is also some similarity in it, but that it is called Russia now. Yeah, it's a great subject in our family history and family discussion.
All right. I'm Max. I grew up in post-Soviet Berlin. I was born in '87, and kind of had Berlin was reunified. There was a West and an East German part of town, and things really changed. The 90s were really shaped by this attempt to re-envision something of a new present, not necessarily future, marked by a lot of hedonism, a lot of techno music. I don't know if you know, Love Parade was very big in the 90s. I must say this whole festival reminds me a bit of a techno festival, but instead of music, there's readings, which I really like. So let's call it like nerd fusion or something. And I would say that for me and my group, maybe my generation, I don't know, Soviet Union really signifies this idea of putting left visions into practice, and it also signifies its failing. And I would say that we still haven't recovered from this pushback, from this disappointment. And I would say that the European left, at least, still has not recovered from this disappointment. And we're still trying to find a new basis on which to build, because the visions that were formulated in, the classics of left critique, once they were put into practice, they produced such an amount of violence and such an amount of illiberality that really I think we're still we're trying to work on something of a new vision, especially now with the right wing returning with a vengeance in Europe, in the US. This is a task more important than ever.
Thank you, all three of you. In Malayalam we say, "Van marangal veerumbol." When giant trees fall, when mammoth trees fall, an entire ecosystem underneath them gets disturbed. So I think both Georgi's and Jenny's works also speak about this intersection of the larger political histories, the smaller histories of individuals, of people who get caught in between these, large historical shifts. So I was wondering whether you could talk a little bit. Jenny already talked about her immigrant grandparents. What kind of stories, what kind of narratives have you encountered? Not necessarily again about the Soviet Union, but this when people, small people, scattered voices are caught amongst huge historical tectonic shifts.
I used to live with my grandparents for 7-8 years. So I must say that their way of storytelling, this kind of oral storytelling, was very important for my writing. Was very important for the structure of my novels. The structure is like their storytelling. You know, when the old people start to tell stories, it's like in Shahrazad. You start to tell something, then you stop, you made some side corridors, and then you come back, and then you put story into the story, into the story. And this is a very natural way of storytelling. And it's a very fragile way of storytelling. When I started to write in Bulgaria, we had this kind of monumental culture or monumental style of writing. We needed big novels. This kind of ideology is a bit monumental, of course, we know. My idea was to write a kind of anti-monumental books. To write about the small stories, about the stories of the people that are on the dark side of the moon, that are not in the newspapers. My parents were like this, my grandparents. Maybe you know, or maybe you don't know, but during the socialism, 80% of Bulgarians never left the borders of Bulgaria. The world was denied for us. You know, we were without passports, and 80% is a huge percent. And I love, and I would say this because we are here in India. There is a saying by Montaigne. He says, I never had a big curiosity to visit India. But if someone forbidden me to visit India, I will be the unhappiest person in the world. So this is the idea. For us, we had this feeling that world is somewhere else, that Eiffel Tower exists like a souvenir with a thermometer, but nobody from my relatives was there. And that's why one of the topics of my books is about this non-traveling culture, also about something else, about the things that never happened. This is very important for the closed societies. In Bulgaria, we had a lot of things that never happened, actually. And sometimes the things that never happened in a personal life or in a life of a society, they are much more important than the things that happened. We never had our 1968, like in Prague, or we never had our 1956, like in Budapest, like in Hungary. And we never traveled abroad. We were too quiet, too close. And that's why I want to tell stories of these people, the people who lived in a small world, but who had their stories and who were afraid to tell their stories because of many reasons. We don't have time to tell them. And these people, always I must say thank you to my grandparents, because they were great storytellers. I'm just copying them. And that's all.
Jenny, would you like to respond?
Hello. Yeah. There's, I think, also a connection between Soviet Union and Bulgaria because of Dimitrov, and it's also such a festival is always a chance to meet other writers. So I met Georgi only here in Kerala, which is kind of very funny because we are living in Europe and he was even living in Berlin, but we didn't talk about the things only here and on stage, for instance. So my grandmother she was a writer too, and she wrote a play about Dimitrov. Yeah, she wrote a play about Dimitrov, and Dimitrov was the first leader of Bulgaria after the war. And he was like the chief of the Communist International organization in Soviet Union. So as I only learned later, he brought also some of these show trials that he had experienced in the Soviet Union to Bulgaria. And there were also many people became victims to these trials and were persecuted. And it's interesting that the older you get, the more you learn about things, and the more you understand how many mistakes you did before in understanding something or thinking you understood something. So for me, Dimitrov always was the good one, who defended himself in German, in Berlin, when he was accused of having set the Reichstag on fire, the government building in Berlin. And the fascists wanted to have someone, also something like a show trial, and they would blame the communists for having lit the Reichstag, the building. And one of the people who were accused of like in this case was Dimitrov. And Dimitrov was like legendary because he learned German in prison. He refused to be defended by someone, and he said, I will defend myself. And then he went to the trial, and in perfect German, he defended himself so that the fascists had to set him free. So this was like the legend that I grew up with. And only later I learned that also Dimitrov, whom I always took for a good person, did these persecutions in Bulgaria, and many people, I think 2,000 something, lost their lives in the course of these persecutions. And it's the older one gets, the more you understand that the truth is a long process instead of a fact, and that you perhaps live on to also to learn about things that you didn't face before, and this is also a kind of a connection between the both of us.
Thank you, Jenny and Georgi. I want to ask the next question to Max. You spoke about you inhabiting post-Soviet Union Berlin. You're also a cultural memory scholar. As far as I understand. So what are these pre-Soviet Union memories that the city has inherited? What is it that you deal with on a day-to-day? What kind of memories do you have of a pre-Soviet Union?
There's a lot to be said about that. Let me just kind of try to restrict it to a few points and trying to relate to something that you've been talking about, which is, in a way, a positive connection to memory or stories that were being passed down to you. In contrast to me, I've never had my grandparents on either side. I've never talked to them, so I don't have stories from firsthand. They are being passed down to me. And I've been thinking a lot about this deceit of the archive that always suggests I'm the place where memories are being kept, or maybe people that pass down memories to you. And then once you dig into it, like you start looking into what stories they told you or what stories have reached you, you realize that some of them can't be true, at least not like this. So there's an unreliability also of the witness and also of the archive, because it's always shaped by the things people want to tell. And then talking about GDR, the story the GDR wanted to tell and the story people have internalized is this idea that it was an anti-fascist country. And now with the right-wing rising in Germany again, this really goes against everything that Germany has been teaching me and teaching all of my generation, and kind of telling them itself and the world that it has overcome the violence of the past. And in a way, this, you could call it gaslighting of society, but of itself, you could call it self-gaslighting, of having overcome the past. It really also has its roots in this GDR idea of anti-fascism as a story we tell, as something we just kind of conclude or decide that this is who we're going to be. And now we kind of turns out that maybe it's not enough to tell a good story. Maybe it's necessary to also, set practices in play that actually realize the story. So in a way, me, myself, and maybe also a few others, we are moving beyond this idea of the world being constructed by narrative and rather moving towards this idea of narrative just being a kind of flare, kind of fake facade we built in order to not face realities behind the facade of narrative. So in a way, there must be something real that we have to rediscover that moves beyond this whole idea of narrative shaping the world and then the world becoming a different place. So maybe that's something for us as authors too, to kind of start exploring how narratives have kind of helped covering up the realities of continuity, the realities of violence that have been happening all along, and that maybe also my parents or maybe society as a wider whole didn't want to face.
Thank you. I think one thing that is common to all three of you is the idea of memories. I think all your work deals very significantly with the past and with memories, which in a sense is good for this panel because we are also thinking about a memory here, the memory of the past Union, Soviet Union. So how do we give a kind of a narrative? And your narrative structure was something that I really loved, around the way in which you built your memories and classified them into the 60s, taking it decade by decade. So how do you give structures to these memories? What kind of narrative structures do you pick up in order to talk about memories?
There are 2 or 3 big unlockers of memory. One of them is the smell, the sense of smell. The other one is the music. Musical structures stay till the last moment in our memory. When we forget everything, when we have the last level of the kind of dementia, the last thing that will remain that is the music structures. And the third unlocker of the memory is exchanging of stories. If I tell you some story, you could say, oh, wait, I have the same story. It's something like this. So in my novel, there are a lot of music, a lot of smells, sense of smell, and a lot of stories, short stories, who could unlock memory. But why the memory is important? Shortly. Because memory, drawing a tiny red line between the past and the present. If we failed with our memory, then there will not be this border between the past and the present. Everything will be the same. Then we will not recognize 1939, let's say, the beginning of the war. It will come like something, oh, I have some memory about this, but it wasn't so bad actually. It was a good war. And that's why it's important to build memory. What else about the memory? It's connected with nostalgia. This is another problem now. As a writer, I love my past. I love the past. My stories are in the past. The past is full of smells, faces, everything. Future is a kind of empty room. But I know how the nostalgia to the past could be dangerous. You know that the word nostalgia actually is a name of the diagnosis. It was invented in the 17th century by a Swiss doctor who saw that the Swiss guards, when they are abroad and when they listen to the bells of the cows, they have some problems with the heart. They became pale and something happened with them. And he described this like illness, nostalgia. Algus, pain, to the nostos, to their homes back. I think that now we are facing other kind of nostalgia, and this is, I call this chronostalgia. It's a algus to the different times. Our homes don't exist anymore, but this idea that in the past it was better, and we were younger, we were 20 years, and why not we came back to the past, even ideologically? What is the problem? And the small trick, this is that when they promise you to be great again, like in the past, sometimes you think that, okay, I will be again, and in my 20s, I was good-looking man, I was happy, I was young, so let's go back in 1980s. These were good decades for me. I was happy there. But the idea is that the personal time is not reversible, but the political time is reversible, and they are not connected at all. I mean, they will promise you that you will be happy again in the 1980s, but they just would return to the ideology of 1980s, and you will be again at 56. And that will be a problem. So this is, for me, all this thinking about the memory, about the nostalgia, and how it could be dangerous, it could be seductive. It's good to have nostalgia as a person. It's a normal thing. But if you try to put the whole society in the past, it becomes propaganda. So we should be, because we're talking about the storytelling. Actually, these populists, they are very good storytellers. We must admit this. And I think we should be better than them.
Yes.
Hello. What I liked about the book of Georgi was also that he invents, or he thinks about time chambers for the same time, but of different kind. And I think this is also an important point if it comes to memory, that if you have a certain time, like let's say the 70s or 80s or whatever, you will have 100 kinds of memory. You will have 100 of different stories. So it's more about a choir of voices that brings back the feeling for a time all together. It's just if you're writing one book, that's nice, and it's just one book, and there will be another book, another voice, adding something completely different, and only if you have a wide view and you read a lot, you can get a feeling of a certain historic time, and you will see that as we all are different persons also now, everybody will take back home a different memory of this evening. The circumstances are different. So there are so many stories to be told and to be listened to. And I think this is also interesting, because it's not that just one is the owner of the truth about this and that. The truth is the truth of many.
Would you like to respond to that? I think one particularly striking feature that I discovered in the writings of our panelists is the fact that it is increasingly relevant to India today. This propensity to reside in the past, to resurrect a false past, or a past that nostalgia permits us to resurrect, creating, fabricating, and weaving myths into the past of our liking, and saying that this is a guarantee for the future, which I think is something that all of us, and I say not just people of our generation, people inhabiting this country, but also the youth, this whole passion for a nostalgia of for the past. Now, one striking thing that I discovered about both your works is that in the end, there is a violence of memory. A violence that memory inflicts, and you realize it only in the present, that the past has been a false memory. Would you like to talk about that? Because I think your work ends at a point where the war is about to begin again, and it says that it is going to be the end of all wars, and the touting of those kinds of slogans. I think it is dancing, right? Dancing. In 1939, you end the book there. So there is a certain kind of a violence that you see in nostalgia that is there in your work. Would you like to talk about that?
1939 is a very important year in my book. It's the most important year in the 20th century, of course. I still think that this is like a black hole that with the strong gravitation, and we still have problems with the 1939. There is a beautiful poem by Auden, 1st of September 1939. I'm using it in my book, and it starts like this. I sit in one of the dives of 52nd Street, uncertain and afraid. And this uncertainty, this afraidness, let's say, is something that you could feel now in the last 10 years. This is something that really interested me. This feeling that something got wrong. For me, I could say exactly from which year it starts, but this is it's connected with my story, my history. Virginia Woolf has a beautiful essay, and she is saying everything got wrong on December 1910. Of course, it's funny to find the exact date when the things went in the wrong direction. But I think that all of us could feel that something in the air was wrong 10 years ago. And so what to do as a writers, I don't know. At the end of my book, as you told, there is a scene of the beginning of the Third World War because of the full reenactment of the 1st of September 1939. The reenactments are not innocent, even the reenactments anymore. And this is a way of how we are thinking about memory. Because the whole book, in a funny way, I must say, it was my funny idea that how we celebrate the history. We make reenactments. We don't reflect deeply in the events. So in Bulgaria, it's typical to make reenactments of some of the famous Bulgarian revolts. Usually they are unsuccessful revolts. But unsuccessful revolts, like unsuccessful and unhappened things, are very good for remake, for reenactments. And this is a part of the kitsch of nationalism, actually, to make reenactments of the great events and so on and so on. So I finished my novel Time Shelter with this scene of the fully scaled reenactment of the beginning of the Second World War. And something got wrong, and the tanks, which were on the border, just entered into the country. After 2020, everybody think about Ukraine and Russia and Ukraine, of course. And when I wrote this scene, friends who read my book said, okay, it's too much. It's 21st century. It's too much to start new war again in Europe and so on and so on. But I didn't remove it, and yeah, you know what happened.
Jimmy, would you like? Yeah.
Let's be careful with reenactments of the history events.
Your question was about how the past becomes
the violence
violent.
of nostalgia.
Yeah. There's an image, I mean, at least in the German present, but I think also you're hinting to that also for the Indian realities right now. Memory is being mobilized, maybe even weaponized to give us a sense of belonging, give us a sense of the past we come from, how have we become who we are today. And then you also tend, in nationalism at least, you tend to tell a good story. You want to tell a good story about who you are, how you become who you are, how you're morally superior, how you can ask people to behave like you, because you are the good ones, all those things that have been constructed through history. And I think it's really hard to avoid that as long as you think history is a point where you need to find the good story. So if it's not the nation that supplies it, it's going to be your grandparents. If it's not your grandparents who supply it, it's got to be the culture. But it's got to be something that, or religion or whatever. So in Germany, because politics don't really supply that story, because politics have been catastrophic, it's more the culture that is going to give you this idea of the good German past, the good German culture that comes to mind, Goethe, Schiller, and everything after that. So we are having a part in this, right? We as cultural workers have a part in this idea of giving the good story to the German present and saying, after all, there's something of the good Germany that survived. Look at them. And I do find this curious. I think also me as a writer, I find this a bit problematic to play this role, and I've tried to find ways to refuse it and to bring it back. And one notion that I really like has been proposed by the German Jewish writer Walter Benjamin, who has this idea of the past not as a place of wonderful stories, but of a place of catastrophe and rubble and destruction. And I must say, this is much closer to how I see the past, as the past of the last century, the past of the last millennia, that has always been a past of destruction and violence in a way. And maybe all of our strength and all of our energy should be focusing on this idea to rearrange the present in order for the past to not be repeated. So this is all about avoiding the past from repeating itself. And I think there's not less on the line than the question how long this civilization is going to last, right? If we allow the past from repeating, if we allow the past to repeat itself, this can be over very, very fast. Because another world war, we won't survive. So I think there's something about how we view history that's really vital on what we're going to do in the present and how our future is going to look.
I think it's interesting you talk about Walter Benjamin, because Benjamin committed suicide as he was fleeing from Nazi Germany. I mean, he was on the border, and I think he had some false news and he committed suicide. That was the way he died. But also, interestingly, Benjamin has a very interesting way of looking at the past, because he talks about messianic moments that happened in the past, but it gets resurrected in the present. It's only a moment, but it is redeemed in the future, not actually in the past. So that's the way Benjamin conceives of history. But to go back to the violence of nostalgia and to Jenny, how do you respond to that, Jenny?
I think what we shouldn't forget about is that we are living in the future of the people who already passed away. And I also put this question in my book. So what are you doing with a future that is your present? Our future is your present. So we are, in a way, we know about the collapse of the Eastern Bloc. We are sharing, in a way, this experience of fragility of a state, of many states in Europe. The sudden disappearance of things that were familiar to us, in a good and in a bad way, but still. So I think I've seen the hopes of my grandparents fail. And in a way, this kind of failing is my subjects in all my books. And also this is a kind of, this is perhaps the only advantage that comes from such a collapse, that you have so much more experiences, and you are cautious to think that you are on the right side of history. So it brings you into a distance to history at all, and it's like being put in some exiles. This is how I feel it, and this exile enables them to want to write about things like that and to look at it more carefully. And of course, the violence that was used in Soviet Union times against innocent people and also against the own comrades is until now the big problem, because it ruined the alternative that perhaps would have been there. And the violence of the 20s of the last centuries is like the question that we are facing now when we think about some other kind of society that would try to bring justice to people, to equal rights for everyone, and all these nice ideas my grandparents had. And we are starting anew without any basis in a way, and that's a problem.
So I think we would like to open it up to the audience. Are there any questions that you would like to ask our panelists? Please.
Like the evoking of memory, there are a lot of instances in all of the works that whole passage about forgetting also. But also I would like to ask about the kind of Soviet literature that lived out in lands of Eastern Europe, especially because the nostalgia about Soviet literature that we have is completely different from what we read from the writings of Gospodinov, especially when he talks about a local poet coming to his school and about writing and asking Gospodinov, don't you have anything better to write when this 9-year-old boy writing about sunset? So this kind of Soviet literature is not the kind of that the literature that we are nostalgic about. We have sort of a pleasant memory of Soviet literature. So I would like to know about how the reading was, how the writing was there in at the peak and at the disintegration of Soviet Union, because by the time of sort of college time of Gospodinov, it would be the end of Soviet Union. So how the reading was, how the writing was.
I think it's a difficult proposition for them to answer, but I think what he's also trying to say is, in Kerala, our translation literature was all about literature from Soviet Union at one point of time. And many of the younger generations, even today, they grow up on a staple diet of very carefully curated literatures in translation from the Soviet Union. So there is a certain kind of a nostalgia that this kind of literature, which again I would say is carefully selected and curated, engenders in the people of Kerala. And what he says is, your literature or what you have been writing is curiously very different from the nostalgia that Soviet literature fueled in this part of the post-colonial world.
No, I completely understand what to say, because coming from Bulgaria, I know Russian language. I can read in Russian. So I also, was influenced from Russian literature. There is a great Russian literature. I think that Chekhov is one of the best, even the best short storyteller. Or I know Brodsky, Joseph Brodsky is one of my favorite writers, poets, and essayists. So the problem is the problem is when the literature is curated, when they say, okay, you can read this, but you should read this and this. The funny thing was that in the socialist time, because of the deficit, we had a problem with some books from Western Europe or from US. And in the bookshops, they had this, I don't know, did you have it in Germany? If you want to buy some very popular book like Godfather by Mario Puzo or something like this, you could buy it if you buy another very Soviet book like Furmanov or I don't know, something connected with the ideology. You should buy both of them. So they will sell one.
It's a selling strategy.
Even, so this is a deficit and ideology both together. But the great Russian literature is a great Russian literature, and also the great European literature. I'm a great fan of everything that is written, because there is something specific with the European literature that I like. The European literature, European writers could stay on the losing side. You know, this is very important. It's not a literature of the victories. Chekhov, Kafka, and other writers, Milan Kundera, and so on. They know what does it mean to be on the losing side, and this is important to stay in the losing time, on the losing side in the dishonest times, let's say.
Yes.
It was interesting to hear that there was such a strong connection from Kerala to the Soviet Union once. And in a way, I think the high value that was put to education also comes from this connection. And it's very interesting, I think, that even in a dictatorship, sometimes the level of education and of interest in art, in books, in reading is even bigger, because this is the way to communicate within a society. And also, I have a Russian friend. She's a very normal woman. She was running a store in Soviet Union times, and then she moved to Germany, and she would sit in the evenings reading poetry. You know, no German, also not no, but not very many normal German working class people would sit in the evening and read poetry. And I think this is also interesting. You don't only have a nation that did all the persecutions I spoke about, or like the restrictions in what culture you are allowed to, but they also produced immense inspiration for other people who are interested in art. If you think of Tarkovsky was very difficult to the system, but still he could do some films.
Huge fans of Tarkovsky here. I mean,
that's great. So.
But I think the point that is being made is also that even as you like what you read, maybe you should also think about the stories that you did not read, the voices that you did not hear, the literatures that were not curated. So those are also important.
Hi. Can I ask?
Please.
Yeah, so this is a continuation of the last question. You were talking about how the past was violent, and it's a very sad state of affairs that when we look back at it now, the general consensus is that Soviet Union was a failed state. But in Kerala, it's not like that. It's completely a different tale, because we have access, or a lot of the political system itself has been very appreciative of the past, the contributions that the Soviet Union made to India. So in such cases, do you think that not just being, nostalgia can be violent, but it can also provide a ray of hope in times of peril, right? Because when Trump says "Make America Great Again," Isn't it our duty to like say look at the past and make sure that people know what Soviet Union's history is, and how do we do that when it comes to what's the way forward, instead of like just taking the history with us? What's the way forward?
I think to answer you very briefly, our time is running out. But as we go and dig deeper and deeper into the past, do we really stop with the Soviet Union? We go to other things, we dig up the past and say that this is the past that we want to resurrect, which is happening in India now. That is a thing that I wanted to, I began with that, right? So how much of past can you tolerate? How much of past can you allow the future to be built upon? Is the past going to be, as you rightly said, is there going to be some kind of a deficit upon which the future is going to suffer? Would you like to? Does that answer your question? Where do you stop? Do you stop with the Soviet Union? You won't.
Just to add at the final second that I think that our books, if you'd like to know more about what we're thinking about the past and literature, you should take the book, The Kairos by Jenny Erpenbeck. I love the title. I'm jealous about it. And also, like in my books as well, this idea that the past is also a very personal thing. And when we're talking about the political things, they are always a very personal things. So I think this is very important idea, and maybe our books could help answering of this. Our books are more clever than us.
I think on that note, I would just like to end by saying that as we tread into the past, let's tread softly. Let's tread with caution so that we do not resurrect certain things that we feel will be our future, because most often those will be deficits. So on that note, thank you so much. Thank you for a wonderful evening with us. Thank you. Thank you, my panelists. Max.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for this fascinating session and evoking a sense of deja vu about the USSR once upon a time.